This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Yago Rodríguez. He's going to be telling us all about Wilayat Sinai, which is a branch of ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. The situation there goes largely underreported. However, Wilayat Sinai are actually posing quite a threat to Egypt. They're organising and they've been launching many attacks, some of which were pretty successful. They also have connections to ISIS in Libya, which is huge, and there have been dealings between Wilayat Sinai and militants in Gaza. To support Popular Front and get bonus episodes, go to patreon.com/popularfront. This episode is sponsored by thedefensepost.com. You've written this massive paper about Wilayat Sinai, ISIS in Egypt. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, almost 2 years ago I was bored with my career and I decided to begin to study the Wilayat Sinai because they are part of ISIS, but it is probably one of the least treated branches of ISIS. So I began to take all the propaganda videos, everything I found. This was in 2016. And then I wrote this huge article, mainly from the military point of view, but, it is very interesting because this branch has also a lot of influence in Libya and in other parts of Egypt, and that's interesting because in theory it is just the Sinai Wilayat, not the Egyptian Wilayat, let's say.
So maybe if you can explain what is the Sinai, because, to say ISIS in Egypt, they're not exactly running around Cairo by any stretch, but they are in the Sinai. I've seen footage of them even setting up checkpoints in certain areas. Maybe you can explain that. What is the Sinai and why do they have power there?
Well, the Sinai, it is that big peninsula at the east of Egypt that is a big crossroad between the North Africa and the Middle East. So there we've got in the recent history a lot of battles between Egypt and Israel. The area was occupied by Israel until 1982, and there has been also a lot of things going on the Gaza Strip, which is also has a common frontier with the Sinai.
Yeah, there's a border, right? There's a border between Gaza and the Sinai.
Yeah, that's it. And that's a big thing because there appears a lot of illegal activities, smuggle of weapons, and that all creates the base that jihadist groups want. So the Sinai is that peninsula. There is like three big geographically speaking areas. So we've got the coastal areas, especially the north, that is the most populated part. Then we've got a big, at the south of the northern coast, there is a big area of big desertic plains and hills, and that is it has almost no population. And at the south of the peninsula, there is a big mountainous area, very difficult to fight there for the Egyptian army. Also, there is almost no population. There is always a little, and also in the peninsula, the presence of Bedouin groups has been existent since centuries ago, and they are nomads, so they are always moving between different places. So this is essentially the peninsula, a big crossroad between Middle East and North Africa and the appendix of Egypt.
It is Egypt, but it's a bit of a no man's land, and it has been that way for quite a time, right?
Yeah, it's Egypt, but it is different from the Egyptian mainland. Maybe that is why it is the Wilayat Sinai so local focused, more than maybe other wilayats, and they are especially acting in certain parts, not even in the whole Sinai, but just in a few areas, very concrete, very accurate areas, let's say.
When did you first see Wilayat Sinai spring up in these areas? When did they kind of form?
Well, these kind of areas, different from the mainland, tend to have, let's say, regionalism. And in this case, we've got the Bedouins, we've got always a slightly different relation with the central power than other parts of Egypt. So that has always led to a different situation, to insurgency and to a history slightly different than that of the Egyptian mainland. So these groups began to appear in the 80s, the jihadist groups, and there was one that is also considered one of the first bases of ISIS, let's say, that is Jamal Tawhid wal Jihad, but this is an old group. And with the beginning of the century, Al Qaeda, the International Jihad, and there is a group called Ansar Bait al-Maqdis. That is the real origin of ISIS, because this group, with the victories of ISIS on October 2014, get united with ISIS.
So that was like the precursor for ISIS in the Sinai.
Yeah. Even it can be said that it just transformed from Ansar Bait al-Maqdis to Wilayat Sinai. Maybe it is 90% the same group. So
right. So we've seen a similar thing in the Philippines, where Abu Sayyaf ended up just pledging allegiance, and there we go. They're a cell of ISIS now, or a franchise. Is it the same kind of thing?
Yeah, it is. It has a lot of common things, because if you take a look at jihadism, they tend to take advantage from local features, from local characteristics, and in this case, it has. Well, it is not the same, but it has a lot of common things with that. But it must be said that this all began mainly with the Arab Spring, with this destabilization of all the MENA area, and then the Muslim Brotherhood get elected in Egypt. When in 2013 the General al-Sisi makes the coup d'etat and takes the country, and in that moment a lot of radical Islamic persons who liked Muslim Brotherhood began to look to this kind of jihadist groups. And there begins the problem, because the reaction of the Egyptian armed forces is not very intelligent from my point of view.
Why? What do they do?
Well, if you take a look at the figures, the numbers of this group of Wilayat Sinai, the Israeli officials tell that they calculated around 500 members. Egyptian authorities said that they are 12,000. I think that this huge difference can be explained because the Israelis are taking just the combatants, but the Egyptians might be taking the supporters. That can be, a civilian that, who make commentaries in favor of the group, but doesn't make anything to a civilian who gives them information and all that stuff.
Yes, it's all part of the network.
Yeah, that's it. The support network for the combatants.
Right, and what kind of attacks have Wilayat Sinai been doing? Because this is a very underreported situation. I know they've been doing attacks. I know that for the Egyptian military, they've found it very hard to drive them out of the areas that they control in Sinai, because they just kind of move on and spring up again. But you really don't see a lot of this in the media. So maybe you can tell us all about their insurgency, what they've been doing.
Well, they have been doing every kind of action, from typical mortar attacks to ambushes, to IEDs attacks, all that kind of things. The bigger operations, I think it was one to take Egyptian military outpost. There they had a platoon of tanks with machine gun nests, with mortars. It was a well-fortified position, but they were they planned well the attack, and the Egyptians were maybe too lazy. They were caught in low guard, and so the attack was like they sent first the typical car bomb. Then with the confusion, there were at 2 kilometers there were waiting 3 or 4 Toyotas loaded with a lot of fighters. They go very fast. They attack the position. The tanks of the Egyptian army begin to run away, and the RPGs are fired at them at almost 50 meters, but they fail at that distance. It is incredible to see the image because the tank is running away, a lot of dust around him, and the guys just running behind him, firing the RPGs. So it is a very interesting action, and you see that they are very aggressive in their tactics, and they are good. I can say that the average Wilayat Sinai fighter looks better than the average fighter from Islamic State or any other group in Syria, actually.
Why is that? How do you mean they look good? Do you mean they fight better or they're better equipped?
Well, I think they are better trained, clearly. I don't know exactly the reason, but just 1 week ago, a guy was caught in Libya. He was called Hisham al-Asmawi. He was caught in Derna at Libya, as I said, sorry. And he was part of Al-Qaeda. He was part of Al-Qaeda in the Sinai. So he was closely related to Wilayat Sinai. And he was a member of special forces. So it is very likely that some members or some founders have been part of the Egyptian military and have taught them certain tactics. Because I see, for example, use a PKM machine gun. I think you know that machine gun, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's kind of not the kind of machine gun you want to pick up and fire from the hip, but often the machine gun we see being fired from the hip in Syria and places like that.
Yeah, that's it. The typical machine gun that they fire from the hip, that's it. Well, so this is the surprising thing. I see them not just aiming, but using a tripod. And that's these little details. Or, for example, I saw they prepared an ambush, and it was, really well prepared. They put an IED, then there was an assault team at, let's say, 100 or 200 meters of the road, and they had their AKs and their RPGs, and you couldn't see, but you could hear the support team. So they were use the IED to create a shock, confusion, the assault team, and a support team with heavy machine guns at the back. It is not perfect because, for example, they didn't have protection for their flanks to get surrounded, but it means that they have been trained. There was also a discipline of fire. It wasn't like everyone shooting when they want. No, there was first they shoot, then the first machine gun, then the second machine gun. They alternate their fire. So it is relatively well planned.
Right. So you can tell there's some kind of military discipline there, whether that's extremely well-trained guerrillas or, like you say, people who are former special forces from Egypt. I guess they get involved in their training people as well, right?
Yeah. That's a big point. You see, for example, their propaganda, and a good part of it is dedicated to how they teach their fighters, and they have theoretical lessons, because in the military there are practical, like say when they go to real fire exercises, and there is also a theoretical teaching. So they make this. They have, for example, an inert manpad or an inert ATM, and they teach them how to use it. They show them in an image, I remember, an M60 pattern, and they show them what is the weakest part. If you have to aim where it is most likely that it will cause an absolutely destructive expulsion for the tank. All that kind of stuff is very interesting, but still we don't know exactly who has been teaching them all of these things.
Right, but it's quite clear, they have people with the knowledge to do this stuff. And do you know where are they getting their weapons from?
We've got, as we said, the Gaza Strip. There is a lot of smuggle. All this area tend to be, as I said, a crossroad, and so there it is centralized, or the black market from part of Africa that goes to the north, and from part of North Africa who goes to the east, and that things. But the weapons, possibly a big part of them come from Libya. With the destabilization of the country, a lot of weapons were free, and if I don't remember bad, in 2013 it was got a load of 60 ATGMs that was going from Wilayat Sinai. So there is a pretty big traffic of weapons going on there, and that's where they get them from. However, you cannot regret the possibility that also corrupt officials, as we have seen in Syria and a lot of times, have been selling them weapons and that kind of things that are very common.
Right. So how do the weapons at this stage get from Libya to the Sinai?
Well, it is a very big frontier, and it is also an unpopulated frontier at the south. Libya and Egypt, most of the frontier is just a big desert. So even having drones and all of that technology, it is very difficult to control the area, because you need to have outposts, and it is very expensive to have outposts isolated in the middle of the desert, that they need logistical support from time to time. That logistical support can be attacked, and in the end there is also a lot of people who lives by crossing the frontier. So it's like, for example, between Syria and Turkey. Turkey cannot close the frontier because a lot of people is living from that trade between the two areas. So this is the same. You've got various problems, and possibly also the corruption. If they if there is an outpost with 15 guys, maybe it is not too difficult to give something to the leader of the position and pass through that place. And after that, they have to go east and hope not to find a checkpoint, and that's all.
So it's pretty easy.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if you are in the car and you are thinking, damn, if this guy doesn't accept my money, or if, I'm not sure if easy, but yeah, it happens, and it has happened a lot of times. In the end, if there is so much weapons in the Gaza Strip, it is obvious that they don't come from Israel. They come from the Egypt that is their only frontier. So
yeah, well, let's talk about Gaza, because for a long time I was planning to do a documentary about ISIS in Gaza, and I know that Hamas and specifically Al-Qassam have been killing ISIS guys in Gaza. They're fighting them because they don't want them taken hold. They don't want any challenge to their power, really. That's the main issue. However, at the same time as fighting ISIS in Gaza, Hamas are also dealing with ISIS in the Sinai because they're getting weapons and stuff like that. Have you seen any evidence of that in your research?
I haven't seen it, but I think that it is very likely because, well, if you take a look at the activities in the Sinai, most of them can be concentrated between the 15 kilometers of between the city of Aris and the frontier with Gaza. In those 50 kilometers, most of the terrorist attacks happened. So that is exactly the frontier with Gaza, and that is where obviously Wilayat Sinai has more influence because, there are different theories on one of their leaders called Abu Osama al-Masri, but one of them is that he is from the city of Al-Aris. That is where a lot of terrorist attacks happen. So I think that if Hamas want to get weapons, it is possibly important to have the support from Wilayat Sinai at the other side of the frontier, because all these kind of illegal activities, weapons trade, drugs trade tend to be connected. So possibly there is certain support or mutual help.
And what about the connections in Libya? I think, what's ISIS in Libya? Is that Ansar al-Sharia?
Yeah, it was ISIS and it was Al-Qaeda.
Right. And do the Wilayat Sinai have a connection to them? Because, the proximity would make sense.
I think I cannot say 100%, but it is very likely because, first of all, the weapons, especially as I said, the ATGMs possibly came from Libya. As we said, 60 were caught by Egyptian authorities before they were Wilayat Sinai. This was when Ansar Bait al-Maqdis. And obviously Libya presents an opportunity. Maybe it has happened like with ISIL when they went into Syria. They have found an opportunity in Libya to establish contacts, to get support, and maybe there's a book that is the management of savagery that has influxed a lot.
That is, I think we should mention what that is. That's basically, I forget who wrote it, but I know that Al-Qaeda and many other jihadist groups used it, specifically ISIS, when dealing out horrific torture on their victims.
Yeah, well, it is. The book is like a strategic guide written on 2004 by an Al-Qaeda strategist. The writer was Abu Bakr Nagy, and it has been closely followed. Even if you see the targets of the attacks of Wilayat Sinai, you will find that they are possibly following step by step this book, because, for example, this book detects like two big weak points of the states. That is especially the tourism and the petrol. It says that those points must be attacked because they have a big infrastructure. You cannot protect all the tourists, you cannot protect all the refineries, all the pipelines, all the docks, you cannot protect everything. So if the state want to protect these assets, they need to send a lot of troops. And when they send troops there, they must take them from another place. So when that another place gets weakened, the terrorists can grow up there, and they can establish their region of savagism. That's what they call. That's like a step towards the final aim that is established Islamic State. So if you see the attacks of Wilayat Sinai, they are especially directed towards tourism, towards foreigners. Even a Croatian citizen was killed by them after having him kidnapped for a long time, Tomislav Salopek, and they attacked the Italian consulate, and we all know those kind of actions that they take. So that is very, very interesting because it is what they are mostly following. Still, if they don't have success in the Egyptian mainland, if the central power stays strong, it will be almost impossible for them to achieve anything because, Egypt is too big for them.
I was going to ask, what are their aims? Because, like you just said, Egypt is far too big for them. They're not going to end up taking over Egypt, and they're not going to turn Cairo into their version of Raqqa. And even in the Sinai, they don't really have a permanent base. So what is their aim? It sounds to me like they're just causing chaos in the name of jihad. I guess, what's their end goal?
Yeah, well, if you read this book, it has like three big phases. The first of all is the vexation phase, they call that. The second one is the management of savagery, and the third is the establishment of the caliphate. The first phase, the vexation phase, consists on create vacuum power, to destroy the state or to weaken it at certain point that it leads to a situation where the state has lost the power in that area. So when that happens, begins what they call the savagery phase. More than savagery, it should be called wildness, because it is not savagery in the sense of kill a lot or violence. It is in the sense of that there is no power. It's like a wild situation. So at that moment, in theory, they are prepared not to take power, but to get out the state and dominate the area, not necessarily on their own, but also making agreements with other groups. Especially the tribes are one of the preferable targets in this sense. So what they are trying to do is create chaos, waiting for a moment, maybe something like an Arab Spring, something like that, when the situation for the state becomes very bad, and maybe not in their own, but also, making agreements with the tribes, with political groups, Muslim Brotherhood or whatever, even Al-Qaeda. It depends a lot in the local relations between them, and at that point, build their strategy. So that's what they are trying. Generate chaos, and we will see if there is an opportunity in the future to expand the jihad.
Right. And what kind of support do they have? Because I have friends from Egypt. I have 2 Egyptian friends, and neither of them, kind of giving me this impression that hardline Islamists jihad is a big thing there, or ever was really. It's not exactly in the culture there as it is in other places where ISIS have taken hold.
Yeah, well, the point is that maybe it is a very local thing. They have tried attacks in El Cairo, that kind of things, but their main activity is obviously in certain part of the Sinai. And well, the group, as we said, they have like 500 combatants and 12,000 supporters. Okay, so what is their real support? Well, let me just give. I said later that the Egyptian army did bad, with them, and this was because I want to give you the next data. In 2013, there was a huge operation against them by the Egyptian army, and there were 200 deaths, 1,500 detainees, and 350 homes were destroyed. Also, they cut all the olive trees between El Aris and Rafah. That is a 50-kilometer road, and also to the local airport. Remember that this is a group with 500 combatants. 1,500 people have been detained. I don't want to prejudge the Egyptians, but I bet that a lot of part of that people is possibly or innocent or just low importance supporters that after staying in prison and probably get tortured, they will have more support for this Islamist, for this radical group. So their support possibly has grown due to this way of act.
Right, well, there's the irony. When you have, a semi-totalitarian state, like, let's be honest, Egypt is right now, you end up with support for a different totalitarian ideology, which would be, an Islamic Jihad totalitarian ideology. But what you're saying is basically because of the harsh way that the Egyptian government deals with anyone associated, you reckon that's creating more support?
We know how Egyptian authorities tend to act. They are, there was a very famous case with an Italian student who was possibly mistaken by the Egyptian intelligence. He was hugely tortured, and his body appeared somewhere in El Cairo, I think. So if they do that to a foreigner, and I think we foreigners tend to be, in certain sense, more respected by the authorities.
Yeah, well, I think they're more, I certainly experienced it in Turkish prison. The guards, at least, are aware that if they start fucking you up, someone is going to find out about it. It's really sad, and unfortunately, it's the way the world is. But you're right, like, if they're going to treat a foreigner like that, God knows what they're doing to the people native to the country, eh?
Yeah, and after that, they get more support, and it is very difficult to fight them. But with those tactics, also sometimes I think, I know that this might not be politically correct, but I'm not sure at what point you could deal with local population without quite violent aims. I mean, I don't want to sound like a horrible man, but maybe certain gestures that here in the West we would found like, oh, he's approaching me, he's trying to be good, he's trying to make good to the community, would be taken like weakness, or I'm not sure at what level in this kind of states the state can stay in power without being quite violent. That's my question,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a bit of a dilemma because you cannot treat, pure evil of ISIS with a soft hand. You just absolutely cannot. And it's very easy for Westerners to say, oh, follow this rule, follow that rule. It's not on their doorsteps every day, which, it is out there. And in terms of the growth of Wilayat Sinai, is it still growing? Because I know at one point it really kind of spiked. There was quite a rapid growth. Are we still seeing that?
Well, again, there is a lot of darkness on this thing. It is not clear if they are more or if they are better than 2 years ago or if they are better. There has been a lot of counter-terrorism operations, but they have been still able to make huge terrorist attacks. If you remember, there was one against a Sufi mosque. There, 300 people were killed. That was huge.
Yeah, that was recently, right?
Yeah. It was like, if I don't remember bad, like 1 year ago or so. So, if they are wicked, they are still capable of fighting. That is for sure. There is a little ambush that happened that I find very interesting. It is apparently it has nothing. It is a town on a hill, and there is a guy with an RPG at the limit of the town, and also 3 or 4 guys with AKs. And so they are waiting a vehicle of the army to pass. When the vehicle of the army begin to climb the hill, at a certain moment, it appears for the guy of the RPG, and so he fires his RPG, and the vehicle begins to speed up. They fire their AKs against him at point blank range, but okay, it survived. But the interesting thing on this apparently innocent ambush is that the ambush was prepared in the limit of a town. So that means that they were not afraid that somebody was going to tell the police, that they knew that that vehicle was going to pass, that they know that the people in the end is not going to betray them. And that tells a lot. Why the Egyptian army vehicle speed up? He knows that he's in inferiority, that he's not going to get support from nobody there. So, it tells you that the Egyptian state, as you said before, they have put checkpoints. It is just propaganda, but it is true that some guys with a big gun on their pickups have been in the middle of a road. They are not afraid of police or...
Well, let's talk about that, because I found that really interesting for the first time, or at least for me, the first time I saw it. I think you probably put it on Twitter or something like that. But the Wilayat Sinai set up little checkpoints, and they were, doing these what looked like almost mock patrols around this town in the Sinai, and I'd never seen that before. And that was very much what ISIS were doing when they first came out. Not came out, but you know what I mean, when they started rising up in Syria. Why did they suddenly start doing that, do you think? Because that's a brazen move.
I find it like when an animal make peace to mark his territory. So, like say, we are here, the state is not stopping us. When the people from there see this, they might think, who should I be loyal to? Who makes me more afraid? So this means that the state has lost part of the battle in the civilian minds, let's say. So you see, for example, one operation that they concentrated like 12 or 13 pickups with their heavy machine guns on them and everything. And that convoy was traveling through a road that is very difficult to spot from the air or from anybody to see it and call the army or the police or whoever. So if they feel confidence enough to concentrate 12 pickups, that is, let's say 12 per 5 fighters, 50 fighters, that's like a section of I don't know if that's the name in English, but in Spanish it's sección, like a section of infantry. Yeah, it's like between the company and the platoon.
Section. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a relatively big force, and with that you can assault not obviously a big military base, but outposts with certain troops. And also, speaking on the military point of view, well, if you want, we can speak later about their snipers, because they are very interesting. But they are getting in the minds of the people. They are showing that they've got the force there. They have local support. That's obvious. I remember there was an IED attack, but it is not like waiting in a big road where you know that somebody is going to pass at a certain moment. It was an IED attack against a patrol, possibly of recruits, that were walking close to a village. They were without weapons. So these guys knew in a walk close to a village that can be, somewhere, that they were going to pass. That means that they get really good information on that. Obviously, a lot of people is telling them that. A lot of people is helping them to hide their weapons. A lot of people is not telling the authorities that they are there. And that's, very interesting.
Yeah, that shows at least local support or collusion of some kind. And tell me about these snipers. You mentioned the snipers. What's so special about Wilayat Sinai snipers?
Well, there is a very interesting propaganda video. It is also, it has a good length. It is where they saw that they make sniper attacks against a lot of Egyptian army outposts. And it is very interesting because they are not Navy SEALs, but they are pretty good at what they are doing for the Middle East and for not to be part of a professional army. For example, they act in pairs. They've got these ghillie suits that are very good for camouflage. There is, for example, you see one observer with his binoculars looking for objectives. He has an AKMS for close protection, and the other one has the sniper rifle that can be like an Dragunov or even an M24 rifle like that used by certain parts of the US Army. And they are very good at stalking. They approach with silence. They are able to hide themselves close to an objective, observe it, and make a good shoot from various 100 meters of distance, possibly more than half a kilometer. That is not huge for an army sniper, but it is okay. Also, Dragunov sniper rifle is not good for much more distance than a half of a kilometer. So they have been well trained to approach the objective without being seen, to don't stay at the top of the hill silhouetting themselves against the horizon, to move silently. There is, for example, an image where they are walking with certain position that is the rifle almost aimed, but not exactly, and moving closely, looking at around 90 degrees. That kind of things that are taught for snipers of professional armies are very interesting. And also it must be said that in part this is due to the incompetence of the Egyptian army, because some people think that build a military position is put all the rubbish they generate and build a wall with that. And that might be useful for some things, but you should build properly field fortification. You must hide the position for the machine gun, for the sharpshooters, or for whoever. And that is not happening. The positions of the Egyptian army can be clearly seen from a big distance. The sentinels are very exposed.
Right. So they're messing things up a little bit. Have many Egyptian fighters gone over to join ISIS in Syria? When the war was going on there. I mean, it's still going on, but it's no one's really going to join ISIS there anymore. They're kind of on their way out. Have we seen many Egyptians head over?
Well, jihad nowadays is an international phenomenon. We can say the globalized jihad. They are for sure. They have appeared also, if I don't remember bad, the Cobra PG-7 Egyptian warheads, and they have been used in Syria. So there is obvious connections. I cannot say 100%, but possibly there are Egyptian fighters there have been, possibly there might be some still today. But it is maybe more interesting that Wilayat Sinai has get fighters from Palestine, from Gaza obviously, from Egypt, and maybe from other countries like Jordan, but that is not sure.
And what about Israel's role in all of this? What are they up to?
Well, it is always interesting that Israel is very close. They have frontier, and if they will take action against this Wilayat Sinai, if Egyptian army fails to control certain areas, because we see that even at certain moments, the Wilayat Sinai has fired rockets against Israel, trying to provoke a response. But Israel cannot violate the Egyptian airspace, because that will cause a huge problem in the internal affairs of Egypt, because we know what happens in certain countries when these kind of things happen. A lot of people think, oh, how is this possible? Just because somebody has penetrated the airspace 1 kilometer or things like that. So they can use Egypt as a safe space to launch rockets, and Israelis must be very careful on the response. So it is interesting in that sense. And well, they have an interesting net of shelters over the Sinai. Some of them are prepared to produce their own IEDs. They try to be self-sufficient, because it is interesting. If you are trying to prepare explosives, you cannot do, or at least they don't do always on big cities. They are in the middle of the desert, but that cannot be connected to the general electricity net, because that would make the police. That would call the police the attention of the police, because if you see, to produce an ID, you need a lot of welders and a lot of electricity, and that can call the attention of the police, because there is somebody in the middle of the desert that is wasting a lot of electricity. At least in Spain, that was used to find hidden places of our Basque terrorist group.
So where can people get hold of you if they want to follow your work and get in touch?
In Twitter I am MinsterTX, and I used to write in Spanish, and I think I've written pretty interesting things on T-40 Armata or Type 99 Chinese tank or things like that. I'm also writing a book about the Syrian war. I'm like 700 pages, so it is been pretty hard work. But yeah, in Twitter, I am in Twitter.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would suggest that everybody goes and follows you and reads up on your work as well, because I think the work you've done with this Wilayat Sinai thing is very much like the ethos of Popular Front, getting into the nitty-gritty, the very niche kind of stuff that mainstream, I hate to use that word, but mainstream media will tell you that nobody's interested, and actually loads of people are interested in it. So I think it's great work, man.
Thank you very much, and thank you for Popular Front, because I think that is a very interesting podcast, and my English is not perfect, but I like to hear it a lot.
Hey, my Spanish is non-existent, so don't worry. Thanks very much, mate, and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Bye.
So that was Yago Rodríguez talking about Wilayat Sinai, the ISIS threat in Egypt's peninsula. This episode was sponsored by thedefensepost.com, defense with an S. And if you want to support Popular Front, if you want bonus episodes, narrated articles, all sorts of stuff, go to patreon.com/popularfront. And again, if you like what you're hearing here, please help us keep it going, because the podcast will stay for free, but getting it up and running really does help if you support on the Patreon. That is patreon.com/popularfront. Special thanks to Alium Leroy, Axel Iverson, Cedar Fenn, Chad Walker, Cody Bergerud, Dan, Diana Gorvanek, Dan Dunham, Emily Molly, Fletcher Tate, James, Joanne Stocker, Lawrence Abrahams, LH, Margaret Bowling, Peter McCormack, Ryan Sandercock, Stephen Henderson, Teddy and Zachary Hinch. Thank you very much. Please subscribe and hit the bell on our YouTube. That is youtube.com/popularfront. There's going to be a lot more video content coming soon. To keep up to date with Popular Front, follow me on Twitter. That is at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN, or the Popular Front Twitter, which is at Popular Front CO, like the website, which when we hit a certain Patreon goal will become more than a landing page. It will become a full website, I promise. That is popularfront.co. You can see all the episodes there. Also follow us on Instagram. There's a lot of stuff there. Instagram.com/popular.front. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home. His SoundCloud is soundcloud.com/home-2001. And the outro was by Son of Old. SoundCloud.com/son-of-old. A lot of people have been asking me about the outro music. And me and Son of Old, we're talking about maybe putting together some kind of mixtape or something like that. So we can maybe put that out. But that will go out on Son of Old SoundCloud and probably on the Popular Front one as well, which is, in fact, what is it? SoundCloud.com/popularfrontcast.